Consensus is one way that the Green Party, seeks to deal with this stuff. Consensus oriented decision processes are the most common in green spaces. Um, and to explain a consensus process and how it's different from like Robert's rules, which is majority rule, right? In the consensus process, we'll be having a discussion about something. A proposal will be put on the table. I say we do X. Are there any concerns? And people will raise concerns they have with X, and we'll actually talk it out, right? We'll actually work through it. And try as best we can to alleviate those concerns, right? Um, I really like the idea of X, but I'm concerned with Y. Now we know the thing we need to address, right? We know how we need to get through it. And then point number 2 here, it says you must have a clear decision rule, right? The danger of consensus is that it just lags out in discussion and never comes to a vote because people want, excuse me, because people want that unanimous consensus. And it's not always possible. Many times in my time in the Green Party, people have gotten mad at me because I forced a vote, because I refused to drop a blocking concern, and I lost. And I knew I was going to lose, but I wanted it on the record that this wasn't unanimous, that there was opposition here. And I can be, I'm thinking of one, I was voted down like 28-4. And I thought it was going to be 31-1, right? So I found out there were 4 people on my side who were sitting quietly in the room. But we still got our asses kicked, right? We still lost. But it was important to me that we had that vote, that we made that clear decision, and that it was recorded in the minutes so that when we come back to it again, which we have, right, and find out that it was foolish and that I was right, that I have something to dance on them with. No, but we have, we have a record of it. But it's important to understand, right, that consensus isn't that vote. Consensus is the process of getting to that point where you take a vote or where you address the concerns, right? Because when you have majority rule, 51% rule beats 49%, but 49% of the people didn't get their way at all, right? And that's not a democratic way to make decisions. So it's important to kind of hear those concerns out and not just say, well, we've got control, so we're just going to move through. That you want to avoid that. Consensus must be participatory. It's inclusive, open-minded, empathetic, collaborative, shared ownership of the process. Often consensus note-taking or stack-taking will engage in what's called a progressive stack, which means that, it will elevate the voices of people who haven't spoken much, right? It'll elevate the voices of people from, directly impacted communities. One thing that comes to mind for me on that is dues, right? When dues debates come up, I often hear about the people who can't afford the dues. And, that point is raised almost always not by the people who can't afford the dues, but by people who want to be seen defending them, right? The people who are having a hard time affording the dues make it work, right? I know green locals who have homeless members who make the $12 a year minimum dues that they require. They make it happen because they have a vested interest, they have a material interest in the party succeeding. But middle class individuals who are more than comfortable and can afford it, will try to shout over those people on their behalf. And so it's got to be participatory, and we've got to make sure that we're, being inclusive and elevating the voices that need to be elevated, and giving people space to speak.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to kind of emphasize the last little part of that bullet point, actually, that it's shared ownership of not only the process of making the decision, but shared ownership of the result itself, shared ownership of the implementation, because it's meaningless to make a decision to, let's say, endorse something, and then nobody does anything about it.
I often in meetings go, who's going to do it? And often I don't say it as nicely as I just said there.
So it's very important that part of the decision-making process here is not just making the decision, but making the decision of who's going to be the shepherd, so to speak, right? Who's going to take ownership of this? Who's going to take point on organizing and putting the plan into effect, and then reporting back to the group what the results were. Because you can make a decision. Like I said, you can endorse an event or a march or something like that, but then if you do that and then no one does anything, no one shows up that day, no one shows up with banners, no one puts out a press release or whatever, then you might as well have not made that decision at all. It was completely meaningless. Part of this process has to be deciding who's going to do the work. And usually, I think it's a good rule of thumb of whoever proposes it should be willing to at least be part of the implementation, right? It's in my experience kind of a warning sign if someone comes in and says, I think you should do something else, because that ends up being somebody trying to put work on other people, and then it burns people out, and then maybe it wasn't a good idea, and that was why they didn't want to do it themselves, right? They're like, well, you take the risk on that, so make sure this is built into your process.
And as an organization, when you get to that point, right, when someone says we should do this, your organization has to it's really, like Garrett said, it's super important to say, okay, well, you're part of this, right? You have to take a leading role. One of my friends and another former Green Party co-chair, Dr. Margaret Flowers, had a rule that I don't want to hear your idea unless you're willing to unless you're willing to do it. Right. And it seems really, really harsh, but that the people who've been to these kind of meetings know how prolific this problem is of we should, but it really means you should. Right. So while there is, kind of a responsibility on the people bringing the ideas to make sure that they're involved in implementation, there's also a responsibility on the party, which has the infrastructure, which has the experience, which has the membership, which has the skills to support that person in the implementation. Right. So when you say, I want to do X, but I don't know how, say, cool, we're going to teach you how, right? We're going to show you how. We're going to walk you through the steps, and we're going to hopefully get you to the point the next time you have this idea, you don't say, I don't know how. You say, I want to do Y, and I'm going to do this, this, and this, right? Because, lack of implementation is, a huge, huge problem. And I in my mind, we had a member in Illinois had an idea to do fundraising based on bill numbers. So if you want, it was like ballot access, an equal ballot access bill was like 2323. So it was like, if you want, equal ballot access for independents and third parties, donate 2323 to the Illinois Green Party and help us in our fight. And she had like half a dozen bills. I heard that idea and I went, send me the info. And that night she had graphics, right? Because I do a lot of graphic design, but I don't do a lot of graphic design for the Illinois Green Party because I'm just stretched thin, right? But I heard an idea that I liked, and I jumped on helping on the implementation part. I hear other ideas that I like, and they say, Chris, will you make a graphic? And I say, no, I don't have time, right? Or I'll reluctantly get to it eventually. But that implementation is key, because like Garrett said, if you're not doing it, if you're not implementing, there's no action at the end of the vote. What was the vote for? What was what was the purpose? And one of the main problems with consensus can be that it can be inefficient, right? It can seem like wasting time. It can frustrate and discourage members. So you have to have a clear agenda and meeting structure. You have to have, people who are facilitating in charge. You've got to have, I'm on different sides of the fence at different times on time limits. At times I think they can be very valuable, but at other times I think they can be stifling. But this all comes down to kind of what I mentioned earlier, right? If we try to pile everything into a once a month business meeting, it's not going to be efficient. Right? We're not going to be able to have those deep conversations, because we're going to have 10 deep conversations we need to have. So we've got to be efficient about this, not only in our meetings, but in our work outside our meetings, and having clear processes for how do we have these discussions and votes, so that maybe we're even coming into the meeting only to vote, right? We've had in Illinois, we were doing platform amendments a few years ago, and we cut it off because people who didn't participate at all in our months-long process of writing platform amendments all of a sudden wanted to change them the day of the vote. And we literally at one point we voted to extend our discussion for 30 minutes, and we only got through one amendment, and then we canceled it. We said, okay, we're not voting on any more because we're not doing this. We're not spending 3 days going through things with people who refused to participate in the process, who wanted to come in last minute and derail things, right? So we've got to make sure we have these clear processes and that we're
I think especially relating to time limits and stuff, definitely judiciously decide when to use them or not. But one aspect that I keep in mind is that as a working class party that sees building a working class mass movement, right? We should be respectful of the fact that working class people are busy. lots of work hours, lots of hours raising the family, right? Raising the kids, maybe taking care of elderly parents. Like, we don't have all the money. We can't hire, I was thinking of who's Batman's the butler, right? Like like we can't have like these teams of people to help us, right? Like we don't have the money and resources for it, and aside from exploitive things and all. But the point is,
Alfred. Sorry,
what Alfred? Yeah.
like 30 seconds late on that.
I don't have an Alfred. Like, how am I supposed to be Batman if I don't have Alfred, right? But in any case, working class people are very, very busy. And so time is actually a very precious commodity in some sense, or maybe I shouldn't use commodity, but it's a very precious thing for working class people. So for one thing, just getting working class people to your meeting is a big deal, right? Because they have traded some of their very limited free time to be part of the Green Party. And we should really respect that. We should really emphasize that, they're really taking a lot out of their personal lives to be here and to support this movement. And one way that we can respect that is respect it with time. If we tell them that there's going to be a 2-hour meeting, and we stick to 2 hours, because if it draws out to 3 or 4 hours or whatever, not only is it frustrating, but it's not respecting their time. And if they have to leave because they have to get up early for work in the morning or something like that, then they're not able to participate anymore. And so they feel left out. And so why would they continue giving up their free time to an organization that doesn't care about allowing them to participate? So it's very important, I think, for us to be efficient, not because we're trying to be restrictive or crazy about it, but actually it's because we want to be respectful of everyone's time and everyone's ability to participate and the process. And that's part of what Chris is catching on here, right? That folks that didn't respect the process, that they weren't involved for months, who wanted to show up and hold up the show the last minute, that's not respectful of everyone else in the party. Why should they get special treatment? They shouldn't.
Yeah, I will out myself right here and cast some shade at the National Green Party. I've almost completely removed myself from involvement in the National Party. Like, I'm on the National Committee, but I've stepped down from committee chairship. I've removed myself from numerous committees, and a big part of it was that I didn't feel like my time was respected in my work with the National Party. I'd get on a call and there'd be 30 minutes of, I was once on a call that 30 minutes were taken to argue about what small and large packages were when shipping through USPS. I sat there through it. Like, through the whole thing, I just sat there while two people fought for 30 minutes over something that didn't matter to anyone on the call, right? And it was something that had a clear delineated answer by USPS. Right, it could have been looked up after the call and just written in the notes, right? And that's just one of many examples, right? But I've largely removed myself from GPUS organizing because I didn't find it to be effective, efficient, or respectful of my time. And a big part of that comes from being a GPUS co-chair, where I had like 5 calls I had to be on every single week and burnt out. But there's all that. So consensus can be used to kind of navigate these conflicts. A key, and it says it right there, right? We need ensure skillful facilitation in a safe environment.